It's actually not quite 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, 2018, 17. I gave a seminar as a postdoc about light stellar neutrinos. And today I'm going to talk about something completely different, but it's so good to be back here. So let me start by telling you that I think one of the biggest problems in particle physics is the nature of neutrino masses, and I know many of you are interested in this problem. And the reason we are studying neutrino masses is because we do not know their origin. In fact, we discover neutrino masses through observations of the sun in neutrinos. And this is a picture of the sun in neutrinos. This is, by the way, about 20 degrees, so this is very much scattered. And this is what's done by the Super Kamikaze experiment in Japan in the last days of last century. And the story is that we looked at the stars in neutrinos, in fact, it's our own sun in neutrinos, and then we found something that didn't quite make sense. And that took several decades to disentangle with a combination of studies of solar neutrinos and terrestrial experiments. And in the end, what that led us was a couple of Nobel Prizes leading to the discovery of massive neutrinos. And so the idea of this talk is that we're going to keep looking at naturally produced neutrinos. But instead of looking at neutrinos that are in this sort of MeV or GeV energy range, we're actually going to move all the way up to looking at neutrinos in this higher energy range. And then we're going to ask us a similar question, which is, do the things we see in extraterrestrial neutrinos make sense or not? And are we seeing something interesting? So that's the idea. And so to do that, we're actually going to go through 4 things. And so I'm going to tell you a little about the detectors that are able to see these extraterrestrial neutrinos. And those are known as neutrino telescopes. Then I'm going to tell you what do we know about the sources that make these neutrinos. I'm not an astrophysicist, I'm a particle physicist that uses this as their beam. But I will tell you what we know. And then I'm going to tell you what I've been working on, which is to look for new phenomena with these sources. And then at the end, I'm going to tell you what I'm trying to do to push this frontier further. So that's the plan. So let's talk about the detectors that we're going to use in this talk. So here is again this another version of the same figure, where the neutrino intensity is in the vertical axis, and then the neutrino energy in the electron volts is in the horizontal axis. And the important thing about this is that the neutrino intensity is falling steeply with energy. Right, so you can see that from solar neutrinos, somewhere over here, to astrophysical neutrinos over here, there is about 30 orders of magnitude. And that is going to be challenging. And the neutrinos we're going to use for our studies are going to be in this range, where we're going to be populated by the high-energy atmospheric neutrinos, which is going to be a background, and then astrophysical neutrinos, which is going to be our signals. And when I say high energy in this talk, because that could mean something different for different people, I always mean TeV or higher neutrinos. Okay, so, and if I say ultra high energy, I mean maybe like tens of PeVs and higher. So how big of a detector do you need? So if you want to see neutrinos at sort of this rate over here, you need ton-scale detectors. If you want to see neutrinos at this level over here, more or less, you need things like super hemiocandles or kiloton-scale detectors. And if you need to see neutrinos at this level over here, you need actually gigaton-scale detectors. So those are going to be one of the largest detectors we're going to be operating with. And so the primary detector we're going to use is the IceCube Neutrino Observatory. So IceCube is deployed in Antarctica. It's actually embedded in the Antarctic glacier. So Antarctica has a continent underneath, and in the geographic South Pole, there is a glacier that's about 2.5 kilometers tall in the glacier. And so what we at the IceCube collaboration has done, this was just a little before I joined the collaboration, in fact, was to deploy this array of detectors. And the detectors are deployed in these so-called strings. So we drill a hole 2.5 kilometers deep. We deploy a chain, which has a chain of detectors along it. And these detectors are spaced one with another vertically by about 17 meters. And there are 60 detectors per every string. Every detector is going to be a light detector. So it's going to be a photomultiplier tube encapsulated in a pressure system vessel. And they're going to have their own data acquisition system within the detector unit. So, and the data is going to be digitized on site. And additionally, the detector is going to be able to, or each of these digital optical models, as we call them, are going to be able to talk to their neighbors. So they're one up, above, and one below. Horizontally, these strings are going to be separated about 125 meters from one from another. And altogether, these experiments instruments about 1 cubic kilometer of Antarctic ice, which is about 1 gigaton mass study from neutrino interactions. So that's the right size that we need for this sort of physics. So I'm also going to give you some results for our sister experiment that works in a very similar fashion, which is the KM2Net ARCA detector. And the KM2Net ARCA detector is deployed instead of ice, is in water. And it's actually in the Mediterranean Sea. So here what you can see is Sicily over here. And then the detector is over here in this location called ARCA. And you can see that when you see this map, you see that the color of the map changes. And it's because there's sort of like an underwater ridge that goes this way. Okay, and the underwater ridge is going to be important later in this talk. In water, they have deployed these sort of spheres that instead of the ice cube sensors have many photomultiplier tubes per each detector, 31 small ones. And they want to do is build two of these, they call them building blocks. Each of them is going to have 115 of these strings. And together, both of these building blocks together is about 1 gigaton mass. So right now, how much they have built? They have installed 50 of these strings. So that's about a little less than a quarter has been installed. And they have funding for one of these building blocks so far. So what is the detection mechanism of these experiments? Essentially, these are Cherenkov detectors. So what we can see is a Cherenkov light of charged particles. And so we have a muon-neutrino interaction, for example, here. The same as high energy muons. High energy muons in the ice or in the water travel several kilometers. And they actually emit light in a stochastic fashion. And so, but the light is emitting this pattern of Cherenkov light. So what we can do is look at the time of arrival of the light in our array of detectors. And then from the time of arrival of the light, we can actually reconstruct the muon direction, and from there, the muon energy. So these are essentially light-based experiments. So we can actually see various signatures in these experiments. There are going to be what we call tracks, which are the ones on the left. Those are going to be made primarily by muon neutrinos, as well as cosmic muons. Typically, at these energies, the muons are not contained within the detector volume, which means that the energy is going to be quite uncertain because you do not know the origin of the point neutrino interactions. So the energy resolution is going to be order a factor of 2. However, these tracks, these muon tracks, are going to be kilometer length. And so that means that your angular resolution can be determined quite well, or the direction can be determined quite well from the track geometry. And so at high energies, that's typically better than an 80. Neutral current interactions and electromagnetic showers made by electron interactions are going to be to first order indistinguishable in these experiments. And they're going to be making hadronic and electromagnetic showers that are tens of meters, up to tens of meters. But remember in this figure, this separation here is about 10 meters. So the actual showers are very small compared to the lobes. And sorry, I forgot to mention, but in this event displays, what you're seeing in color are PMPs that have seen light, where the color is the time where the light was observed, and the size is the amount of light that was seen. So this is a muon that went from left to right. And then what you're seeing here, this is a shower that was made by high energy, either neutral current or electron interactions. And this is just proportional to the amount of light yields that you see. So when we see these events in our detector, we can measure the energy deposited calorimetrically and that's about 15% energy resolution. But you can already see that it's much difficult to figure out the direction of this thing versus that thing. But by looking at the small time differences between the arrival times of the photons, you can figure that out with about 10-ish degrees. Okay, so this is my favorite neutrino type. It's a tau neutrino. So tau neutrinos are very nice because there are very few of them. There were actually, I think we have been more times to the moon than we have seen tau neutrinos. So tau neutrinos have this interesting feature. And so when you have a tau neutrino that comes along, it interacts, say, in this red blob, and it makes a tau. And typically, taus are very short-lived particles, but these taus are going to be very boosted in particular. And so this is an example of a very boosted tau that is produced here in the case over here, and it disintegrates, making this displaced Verde signature. And we call it a double cascade or sometimes a double bang. And to give a sense of scale, if you have 1 PeV tau, that will go about 50 meters before it disintegrates on average. Okay. So this one is particularly a simulation. Okay. Oh yeah.
Just clarifying, when it says like your time color scale of early to late, does early mean like those are the first events that you detected, and then late means those are the last, or what is early, late, and?
Yeah, early means when the trigger sort of starts in the event. This is a relative time. Okay, so that's our detectors. So now let me tell you about our beam. So which is going to the astrophysical neutrino sources. So the energy of the beam is relatively high. So what I'm going to show you here is what we like to show in astrophysics or neutrino astrophysics, which is the neutrino energy, the horizontal axis, and then the intensity is scaled by energy squared, which is proportional to the energy density of the neutrinos. And then here is the LHC energy. And so this is after more than 10 years of ice cube measurements, this is the spectra that has been measured for all sky neutrino observations in ice cube. And so here is a combination of mu neutrino measurements and then these electron and neutrino measurements. And the way we can make these measurements in a separate fashion is by looking at the track-like events and the shower-like events separately. So this is what we have done, measured after about 10-ish years. The problem is that most of these neutrinos are actually not associated with a particular source. So we don't know where they come from. So what do we know about their sources? So the first indication of the source of these neutrinos was triggered by this event here, which happened in September of 2017. That's the code for this event. And this is a muon, again, went from left to right in this image. And the reason it's an interesting occurrence is that this is a particularly high energy muon. And when this event was observed, Fermi detected a blazar that flared within 0.1 degrees of this observation. Later on, MAGIC also registered gamma ray emission from this object here. And so this object here is known as TXS 056. So that's one of the sources we saw. The other thing that we have seen is an object called AGC 1068. AGC 1068 was detected in a different way. So instead of seeing the neutrino photon correlation, the way we saw it is by looking for clustering in position in the sky. So here is the ice cube sky map. The color intensity is the amount of clustering significance. And so this is TXS, which is the previous thing I was telling you about. And then this here is the point in the sky in the northern hemisphere where is the largest amount of clustering. And so if you look at the neutrino rate as a function of the angle squared from that point, you will see something like this. And so this is an association of a neutrino source with about 80 of these events. And so this is the brightest neutrinos emitters in the north. So now I can put us in context. So here is TXS, which is this transient gamma ray correlation that we saw. And then here is NGC 1068, which is brighter, but so lower energy. And as you can already see, these objects do not make up most of the neutrino sky. They're still only a small fraction of the neutrino intensity that we see. Now, we have been learning about where these objects may be coming from. And we now have some first ideas of what the origin of these neutrinos may be. So one thing that these two sources have in common is that they're active galaxies, though they are slightly different active galaxies. In the TXS, it's called a blazar, which means that this jet that's coming out for us is pointing towards the Earth. And in the case of NGC 1068, we are seeing this active galaxy sort of from the side, so not from the jet. One thing that has come out is the idea that the neutrinos are actually produced in interactions of cosmic rays that are trapped around the black hole or in the vicinity of the black holes with photons. Okay, so somewhere over here in this vicinity, there could be interactions of cosmic rays with with protons producing neutrinos. So if one does the kinematic to figure out, well, I want to have 100 TeV neutrinos, and I have some typical cosmic ray energy, what is the energy of the photon that I need? You find out that the energy of the photon that you need is somewhere over here in the X-ray domain, which in this so-called corona region. So we can see that for NGC 1068. So this is, again, the flux by energy squared versus energy, the electron volts. And so here is the neutrino emission. And this is the gamma rays over here, which are actually upper limits on gamma rays. So you can see something interesting, which is that when the neutrino emission is happening from NGC 1068, the gamma rays are much, much smaller. And so that's an interesting observation on why is that? Well, if we think that the neutrinos are produced through photon-gamma interactions, then the way you produce them is through this process over here. But this process over here produces both charged pions and neutral pions. So charged pions decay making neutrinos, but the neutral pions also must decay making gamma rays. And in fact, we know that the relationship between the velocity of the delta to charged and neutral pions is order 1, which means that you expect to have gamma rays and neutrinos simultaneously. So this is an interesting observation because it tells you that the gamma rays must be somehow attenuated at the source. And so how does that happen? Well, it turns out that the gamma-gamma cross-section is much larger than the PMR cross-section at these energies. And so what it typically means is that if you have a gamma ray target as your neutrino producer, the gamma rays will actually be absorbed in your source. When drawn here as tau is the attenuation length of the photons. And so the idea is that the cosmic ray sees this X-ray here, produce a large intensity of pions. Those pions make neutrinos. They also make gammas, but then those gammas reinteract with these X-rays and they are disappearing essentially. So that's a picture that is sort of emerging. And so this has led to searches for X-ray bright. Okay, so I should back up a second and say that for many, many years, people look for gamma ray bright objects as neutrino emitters. But this actually object is not very bright in gamma rays, so we see them over here. This is much brighter in the X-ray domain. So people sort of shifted perspective to looking for these X-ray bright objects. So we have recently done in IceCube a search for X-ray bright safer galaxies, which just means these active galaxies that are sightly observed. And then we find correlation at the 3.3 sigma level with a population of about 11 sources. And this can be seen over here. These are similar objects to NGC 1068 that are bright in X-rays, relatively dim in gamma rays, and then you see them over here. Again, all of these compared to the oil-sky neutrino emission are still only a fraction. But we are learning a little about these objects and maybe finding ways to detect them. Okay. The other thing that we have learned about the neutrino sky as of now 3 years ago is that our galaxy also makes neutrinos. And what you're seeing here is a picture of our galaxy in optical light and then in gamma rays. And then from the gamma ray observations, what you can do is you can actually extract the gamma ray, the component that comes from neutral pion decay. And so this is the map of neutral pion decay predicted by the gamma ray maps. And so if you think that the galaxy is transparent to these gamma rays, then the charged pion production should have a very similar map. So what we do is we try to correlate this map with our neutrino measurements. Unfortunately, the galaxy is hard to see for IceCube, so we use these cascade events. And so for that, the typical resolution is about the size of this circle. So this is how this map should look like once you incorporate the resolution of IceCube. So it goes from this to this. And then this is what we actually see on the data. where the darker colors means more correlation with the answer map. And so this is actually a almost 5 sigma level correlation between neutrinos and this gamma ray map. And it's the first non-electromagnetic observation of our galaxy. And so it's really cool. One thing that we think about is, and we'll talk more about this, is that we think that these neutrinos are actually produced not by proton-photon interactions, but by proton-proton interactions. I'll tell you more about it later. So this is now sort of everything in context. Here is, again, the neutrino energy and the energy density. Here is the galaxy. As far as we know, this is the galactic neutrino emission. These are these two sources. I didn't put the other ones, but you more or less remember that that's sort of at this level. And so we are now starting to map it. Still, most of the neutrino emitters are not identified. So it's still a long way to go. But we're starting to have the first sources. So I think it's fair to say that we probably have on the order of, if you put 3 sigmas, this is probably a source. Maybe 5 objects have been identified, and then the galaxy. So that's the level of understanding we have right now. Right? And that's the main point I want to bring to you, is that most of the sky is yet uncharted, and we have a handful of objects. And then these objects are going to cover energies from the few TeVs down to maybe hundreds of TeVs, but a few. Okay, so that's the beam, the detector, and that's the beam of sources that we have. So now the question is, what am I going to do with these objects? What am I going to do that it's interesting? And so one thing that I'm thinking about, well, if I started this talk, is thinking about the origin of massive neutrinos. And so we know that neutrino masses are much smaller than the mass of the other charged particles. In fact, the neutrino is a million smaller than the electron mass. And so people think about mechanisms that produce such a distinct masses. Okay, so there are 2 ways of people think about this. So one way is that neutrinos are Majorana particles. And then the other way is that neutrinos are Dirac-like particles. And for a very long time, theorists have liked to think that neutrinos are Majorana particles. And then more recently, some people have some string theory arguments are arguing now for Dirac-like particles. And when I call them the Dirac-like or Majorana-like, the difference between these in my notation is that there is a right-handed neutrino here that's additionally exists. So if neutrinos are Majorana particles, then this is something that many of you have worked on, is you should look for this thing here, which is called a neutrinos beta decay, where you have a disintegration that produces 2 electrons and no neutrinos. And this is smoking a signatures of Majorana neutrinos. Okay, and then there is a very large experimental program looking for this. So it could be the answer. And then the problem is, what happens if this is not true? What happens if we're in the other leg of this chart? Well, if neutrinos are exactly Dirac particles, it's extremely difficult to figure that out. And essentially, the way you could argue for it is you will need to measure the neutrino mass through, say, Project 8 or Catherine or cosmology. And then additionally, you will need to constrain this process very well. And you could compare these 2 masses. And if you make some arguments about some phase cancellations, you could maybe say this could be Dirac. But there's always going to be some loophole in that argumentation. But it requires 2 very difficult measurements to be done. Now, the other probability is that neutrinos are what they call quasi-Dirac or almost Dirac. And actually, this thing here is the difference between this and this category, essentially, is that if neutrinos are exactly Dirac particles, lepton number is an exact symmetry of nature. And neutrinos are quasi-Dirac particles, lepton number is slightly broken. So the question is if you believe the lepton number is broken or not. And if this is true, then neutrino telescopes can see this. So this is going to be only Lagrangian in this talk, but this is the neutrino mass Lagrangian. If you have a Dirac neutrino, so you have a right-handed neutrino here, and you have these terms. And sometimes people like to write this in a matrix, like this, where you have this off-diagonal term, which is the one that mixes the left and the right-handed pieces. And then you have this MR term, which is the right-handed neutrino mass. This MR term, the right-handed neutrino mass, is actually unconstrained by the standard model because it's standard model singlet, so you can do anything you want with this MR. Now, if neutrinos have Dirac particles, these are the dominant contributions to neutrino mass. And then this thing here is something that is proportional to some lepton number breaking contribution. So if neutrinos have Dirac, this term is exactly 0, and you have Dirac neutrinos. This could come from like Higgs interaction, for example. Sometimes people like to do this seesaw scenario where this MR is very heavy. And then sometimes there's this quasi-Dirac scenario where the remanent MR term is a small term. And so this is the case we're going to study in this case. So what happens if this MR is small? So it turns out that when you diagonalize the neutrino mass, what you obtain is that our normal neutrinos are actually secretly 6 neutrino species, where the neutrino mass are actually split through a hyperfine mass splitting. So you have 2 mass splittings that are the large ones, and then there are smaller ones that are hyperfine. And the hyperfine mass splittings can also introduce flavor oscillations, but these oscillations are not between active weak flavors, but between active and, let's say, left-handed, right-handed neutrino states, so visible and invisible states. So what do we know about the fine structure of the neutrino mass? So we know that if there is any fine structure in the neutrino mass, it can be no larger than 10 to minus 12 electron volt squares, and this comes from measurements of solar neutrinos. Now, if you go and ask your theory, say like, okay, let's break lepton number at the Planck scale and something like that, you get that if you do that to high dimensional operators, you get that the induced mass splitting is 10 to minus 22 electron volt squares. These are extremely small numbers because it's Planck scales suppressed. So that's between this range, this is like experimentally limited and sort of theory motivated. And so between this range, you could have a number. Okay, so how are we going to look for this? So imagine you have a source far away. So it could be NGC 1068, that's 14 megaparsecs away from us, or our own galaxy is 10 kiloparsecs away from us. And so the oscillation length of a neutrino goes like the energy divided by the mass square difference. So if your mass square difference is very small, that oscillation length is very large. So what about the no mass square differences? So the no mass square differences actually produce very fast oscillation in astrophysical scales. So the oscillations that we know about, if we have a 1 PeV neutrino, it's about 10 to the 11 meters. That sounds like a large number, but if you compare that to megaparsec, it's only 10 to minus 12 megaparsecs, which means that a typical neutrino changes between flavors, electron, mu, and tau, 10 to the 12 times between going from NGC 1068 to us, which is extremely fast oscillations, okay? So which you can typically not resolve. And so these oscillations are very, very fast. But if there are quasi-Dirac neutrinos, you have the fast oscillations, but then there's also a slow frequency of oscillations. And that slow frequency of oscillations is this one. This is what kind of happens with like Juno, for example, has 2 oscillation frequencies, as fast as small one or like this. So, for example, the oscillation length, if the mass square difference is 10 to the minus 17 electron volt squared, at 10 TeV, that's about 10 megaparsecs. Okay, so that's, and then these oscillations are now oscillations not among the known flavors, but between the left-handed and right-handed states. So the neutrino starts at left-handed and then it converts to this right-handed and disappears. And so what we're looking for is now these very long oscillations. So let me show you how this looks for a source. So this is NGC 1068. This is 14 megaparsecs away from us. So if I make delta m squared 10 to the minus 18 electron volt squares, what you're going to get is oscillations between your visible flavors to this invisible stellar flavor over here. And so this should look, you should look somehow as spectral lines. Now this seems easy if you look at this picture here, but the problem is that we see these sources through muons, which has pure NR resolution. So what I show you here is the oscillations that you would expect for different NR resolutions of ice cube. And so if your NR resolution is like say 15% in log of E, you see essentially nothing, and this is if you have a 10% resolutions. Unfortunately, the answer to this problem is that ice cube resolution is close to something about 30% in log E. And so this shows you here is the capacity to reject no oscillations. So this is this axis to the mass square difference. So if our resolution will be this good, we will be like, this is easy. But our resolution is somewhere like in this range over here. So that makes this makes base very difficult. Now what you can do is instead of looking at an individual object and looking at its oscillations, you can look at many objects and then correlate them through space. And ideally, there is no reason why a neutrino from this object and a neutrino from this other object would be correlated in a new fashion. So this is what we do in this plot here. So here you see, again, mass square difference, and this is significance. But these lines here, what they show you is the expected significance if you were to correlate different objects in space. And so now you can see that you get to the 5 sigma region, but unfortunately, this requires like 10-ish objects at relatively high significance, which we don't have. And so that's why this is a projection for ice cream second generation. Right now, it kind of looks, unfortunately, like this. So if we had more objects, it would work beautifully, but we don't. So we have to wait. Now, the other option is to look at our galaxy. Our galaxy emits neutrinos in a sort of sparse fashion. So how are the neutrinos for our galaxy produced? There is cosmic rays. So this is the galactic plane. We're seeing it from the top. This is X and Y. This is sort of the side view of the plane in C. And so there are cosmic rays in our galaxy going around it. And these cosmic rays are hitting gas in our galaxy. This is a hydrogen map for our galaxy. And so when the cosmic rays hit the gas, they make pions. And through those pions, you make neutrinos. And so this is the neutrino map that you get from it. Now, there are large sources of uncertainty in this map coming from the gas structure and also the cosmic ray status in our galaxy. But this is a model that we're building in my group for neutrino gas emissions. So now you can look at oscillations from this model. So this is the same model map at 10 TeVs. This is our galaxy emitting neutrinos. So if you had this mass square difference, notice that this number is very different because it's a much closer object, 10 to the minus 13 electron square now. Now you see these rings. So these are the disappearance of neutrinos that are being induced in our galaxy. This is just if you want to look for neutrino decay, but let's not talk about it for a second. And so you can see these disappearances. And this looks great, except that, of course, we don't see the galaxy from the top. We see it, all of it. So you need to see the galaxy integrated in the sky. So this is how the map looks when you look at it on the front. This is just galactic coordinates, essentially. And so what you're looking for is the disappearance of neutrinos from different points. And the nice part about this is that you can look at different parts of the galaxy and try to correlate these signals. And so here I show you, for one example, mass square difference, the same one that was on the previous slide, how the oscillation looks. And then when you add experimental uncertainties, this is ice cube-like and this is K-net-like. So you see that you get some sort of structure, but it's already washed out, sort of S-shape. And so this is how it looks in simulation, but I'm going to skip that. This is unfortunately what you get, which is that this is the mass square difference in electron volt square, and this is significance. And again, unfortunately, you get to about maybe between 2.5 sigma. And the reason is that the signal gets very smeared out. Do a little better maybe in some of the decay scenarios. And this is also a projection. Though we're doing internal ice cube analysis that uses somewhat better tools than what was done in this search. And then you can get to maybe 2 sigma. Okay, this is my attempt number 2. So my final attempt, and then after that I will talk about some more things, is, well, sources are difficult because there are few sources. The galaxy is kind of complicated because it's close to you and things get smeared out, it's a complicated object. So what about if I use all of the diffuse neutrinos, which are much larger in number than these ones? So this statistical error is smaller, but now I do not know any individual source. I have them sort of all of them aggregated together. So that's going to be a problem. Okay, so we actually have some ideas about the potential redshift distributions of these sources. So what you're seeing here is the source density as a function of redshift. For 3 examples, this plot is just for illustration. It's not a realistic source distribution, but these are these. This is the star formation rate, and this is the Bilux. And so you see that it has some maximal somewhere around redshift per order 1. So you can convert it to a distribution in length. So when we do oscillation physics, we always like to think about the length distribution. So you see here is the distribution in length of the sources. And so that means that most of the sources, according to these objects, are somewhere around the gigaparsecs length. So the average of the neutrinos, on average, are actually coming from a gigaparsec in distance. So if my oscillation length is about a gigaparsec, that will not get averaged out by this distance distribution. And so if you make mass square difference 10 to the minus 18 electron volt squared, my oscillation length is also about a gigaparsec in scale. And I get these oscillations that are not averaged out by these distributions. And how damp are the oscillations? You can see that if this objects following this B-lag distribution, which is very sharp, the oscillations are very strong. If they follow like these flat distributions, then you're really averaging those oscillations and you get this damping behavior. So how tight are they distributed into our universe determines how thick this is. But you can still do this physics. Okay. So we have done an analysis with one of my students, Chiara Carloni, who looked at the ice cube diffuse data and looked for signatures of this wiggling behavior in the data. And the answer is that we don't find anything significant, but we do find that some places the data disfavors a wiggle existing. So here you see different mass square differences and what they predict, and then the data in blue lines. Okay, and this leads us to a constraint, which I'm going to show you just here. So this is our constraint on these mass square splittings from the all-square diffuse supernova neutrinos. And so this line here in dash is current sensitivity of ice cube using sources. This line in gray is supernova 1987A. And then this blue line here is the combined ice cube data fit, which unfortunately yields no significant observation, but some parts of the data is favored. Okay, so that's what we are right now. And the self-conclusion of this is like, this is probably as good as it's going to get until we find like hundreds of, or tens of hundreds of objects. If we had like hundreds of objects, this would be like completely explored. And you just imagine, like, I find it always so amazing, like when you look at this energy difference that we're measuring, it's so tiny, right? You're measuring 10 to the minus 10 electron volts in different. That's so crazy. Okay. So that's what I want to tell you what we have done regarding oscillations. And what I want to tell you in the last 15 minutes that I have is thinking about what may lie ahead in these and other topics. So one thing that I should mention is that we have deployed the ice cube upgrade, which deployed 5 functioning strings in the Antarctica. So originally we had planned to deploy 7 strings, but there were some problems, so we ended up with 5. And so they are actually in the innermost part of ice cube. So you see on the left the ice cube array. On orange, ice cube deep core, which is in an innermost region of ice cube. And then there is now an innermost region of ice cube, which is not called deep core, it's just called upgrade. So it's just that. And the cool thing about the upgrade is that it's not only more densely packed horizontally, sorry, but also vertically. The separation instead of being about tens of meters is going to be about 3 meters. Okay, so about a factor of 5 times closer. And so this little new guy here is better detectors, and it's actually going to allow for better reconstruction of low energies. That's going to improve our favor identification, which is crucial if you're doing oscillation studies in any scales. So this is some of the new things we are deploying in the ice cube upgrade. So this is the classic ice cube photomultiplier tube, but now we're putting something that looks a lot like the KMTNet version, but has multiple PMTs. We're also trying this double PMT version, so it's called DX, was developed in Japan. And then this version that looks like this one, but is skinnier. Doesn't show much in the picture here, but being skinnier is important because the cost of deployment is proportional to the size of the hole. This hole is lighter, you have to put more fuel to make it, so skinnier detector is cheaper. And so inspiring some work that was done in DMIs by Anthony Hubbard and Reina, now some years ago, they actually managed to demonstrate that you could use muons that were tagged in a component called DMIs, which is sodium iodide crystal embedded in a cube, and that could be useful for like detector calibration and muon tagging. My postdoc Will, who used to be a student here, developed this, it's called a muon tagging assembly. So the idea is that inside of this sphere, there's some empty spaces. So over there, he put some scintillator detectors on them. And there are 4 scintillator detectors in each of these domes. And what they do is that when a muon goes through them, they're optically isolated, so you can tag the muons. And from there, you can then verify your directional reconstructions. And we expect to have thousands of these events now in the new one. And so this was just deployed about a few months ago, and we're seeing how they perform. So how well is the upgrade going to do? So here you have a 4 GeV mu neutrino in deep core right now. This is what we will see. This is the same neutrino, but with the upgrade. So you can see it's much improvement. It's a factor of 10 times better at 10 GeVs. This is a projection that I did with some of my colleagues and students some years ago. And it shows you how well this detector is going to do combined with other little experiments, but it's primarily driven by the upgrade and super K. So what you see here in the left axis here are different neutrino oscillation parameters, the mass core difference that drives atmospheric oscillations, and two of the mixing angles and the speed phase. And these color bands that are not the purple one are measurements from accelerator experiments that we have, different measurements. And then this one here is what we claim an upgrade light detector will be able to do in combination with super K. And so you can see that it does a pretty good job. In particular, in the mass core difference from atmospheric neutrinos, it will probably do some of the best measurements. What's interesting as well is that it will also do something on the CP phase at the level of what NOVA and T2K are doing right now. Another thing that's important, and this is important, especially if you're interested in neutrinos that are beta decay, is the order of the neutrinos. And so what you show you here is the capacity to reject the wrong ordering as a function of time of observation. And so in this projection, start essentially deploying. Well, here we start, this is the way this is plotted is kind of confusing because this is when the app gets deployed, which is the end of 25, not the beginning of 25. So if the app were to deploy at this time, let's say, this is how many years it will take you to get to 5 sigma. And so here we had sort of Orca and Hyper-K starting somewhere in the 27s. They'll give you a bit of a boost. And then additionally, later on, you could add Juno in the latter years. Here is Juno Hyper-K shown over here. And this is only using atmospheric neutrinos. And so the atmospheric neutrinos by themselves, through these combined experiments, should be able to get to the upgrade by the end of the decade. We're also thinking about IceCube second generation, which is going to bring advantage of these new detectors, and it's going to be 8 times larger than IceCube. Okay, so let me just show you this video here. So this video is a video of the K-Internet event that made the press last year. And what you're seeing here is the sharing of cone going through the water. And each of these spheres is one of their PMT units. And remember that they have many little eyes. So there are 31 of those. So what you're seeing is the PMTs being hit in every direction. This event was important because the estimated muon energy of that muon is about 120 PeVs, which leads us to think that the neutrino energy is in the hundreds of PeVs in that range. And here you can see the muon with respect to the detector in different views. And this was published in Nature last year. So my postdoc and my students, so Nick and Alex, they worked on trying to understand how this fits into the global picture. So we did this with the K-Internet faults. So what you're seeing here is these are the IceCube measurements of the neutrino emission. And then these are two different estimations of the neutrino emission associated to that event. This higher one and this lower one. So this higher one is correlates to if that event is of a transient behavior that only K-Internet could observe. And then this one here is if it's due to a diffuse population of objects that just making the neutrino sky. And so what's interesting of this is that if we look at the expected emission of cosmogenic neutrinos, that's neutrinos from cosmic ray photon interactions, those are somewhere in the range. So that's getting to the ballpark. What's also interesting is that, it seems that these flux could maybe continuing onto this. So that's a possibility. It's also possible that the flux that we see in IceCube sort of terminates over here, kind of like that. And then something continues over here, that's new. And so we do not know actually which of this is true. You can do a statistical analysis, and right now there is not quite equal shots, but there is no evidence for this being a separate component with respect to this one, so at the current time. And so understanding what's happening in this energy range is important. So for that, many neutrino telescopes are being proposed. So I show you here this map of neutrino telescopes. So here in blue, I show you the ones that are operating or are being or already funded for construction. So there are two in Argentina, so Yale and Heron is a radio detector. RNOG in Greenland is being built. I talked to you about KM3net and S-Cube. There's Baikal GVD in Russia. And then all of them that have white labels on them are proposals that are in some stage of development. There is 3 ideas in China, and there is a few ideas in the US and Canada, and then there is this one in Peru. I'll tell you in a minute. So my experiment is called TAMBO, and the idea of TAMBO is to try to figure out what is happening in this regime over here between 1 PeV and 100 PeV, where we have the disconnect between the S-Cube measurements and these next generation radio detectors that are going to cover this 100 PeV energy range. And so it's an interesting regime because the radio experiments do not actually reach that energies because their thresholds are very high, 100 PeVs. And the traditional detectors usually are in the sub-PeV region. So this is studied for that gap. Also, interestingly, there has been some recent commentary of these little red dots from the JWST that if they're interpreted as neutrino emitters, they expect to have neutrino emission somewhere in these hundreds of PeV, tens of PeV in the range. So there's some interesting sources that are in this regime here. So the idea is this following. So the idea is we have this valley like that, it's a V-shaped valley. And we have a neutrino that comes along from the left, and it interacts in the rock in the mountain. And it makes a high energy tau neutrino. This high energy tau neutrino interacts and makes a boosted tau, and that boosted tau goes somewhere between 50 meters and 5 kilometers before it disintegrates. And when it disintegrates, it makes an extensive air shower. And this extensive air shower can be detected by particle detectors, in particular just water tanks or scintillator detectors. The separation of these detectors is about 150 meters each other. And to see a neutrino, you need about 1,000 of them in an array. Okay, so first of all, why are we using this geometry? So, well, let's think about it for a minute. So I could have a mountain and my detector on ground, like Pierre. So that means that my neutrino is coming this way, interacts here, and I see the shower like that. So you could do that. You could also do this. You could put your detector in the mountain, and then you see things that come through the earth when the neutrino interacts here and makes a tau that comes out. Or you could do both. And in that case, you get these ones here and you get those ones here. So you get more acceptance. So this is another way of looking at it. This is the sky map of the neutrinos. This is downgoing. That means they're going through the other mountain. This is going through the earth. And this is full acceptance. So it's about 50% more sky coverage if you actually have both mountains. So that's one part of it. Now, this is predominantly a tau neutrino detector. Why is it a tau neutrino detector? Well, you have an electron neutrino that interacts in the mountain that makes an electromagnetic hydraulic shower. That's typically a few meters, and it just disappears in the rock. If you have a mu neutrino, it makes a muon, and the muon loses energy slowly. But it doesn't actually make a hydraulic shower very often on there. This is a very low probability. So the only thing that typically makes these showers are the taus when they decay. So it's primarily a tau neutrino detector. Another good thing about having a big mountain in front of you is that it blocks cosmic ray backgrounds. So cosmic ray backgrounds can be coincident things that go downwards or things that go like this. So these ones are blocked. These ones still go to you, and then you have to get rid of these coincidence showers. Right, so this is important because the signal to background that we expect is a 1029 platform. Okay, this is how I like to think about it. So imagine that you are in TAMBO, and then you are looking at the other mountain. So this is the angle at which you look at the other mountain horizontally, and this is you move it in elevations. And what you're seeing here is the amount of rock ahead of you. So this is the amount of overburden you have in front of you. So in this part here is very much, and nothing goes through. And this is the opposite mountain that you're seeing against. So this is nice because this defines a background region and a signal region that you can use for calibration and then signal detection. Okay, this is what you want to do when you have a very small signals in these experiments. So this is a calculation of the backgrounds due to muons as a function of the energy of the muon exits. And essentially the bottom line is that somewhere when you have 3 to 4 kilometers of rock, essentially your muon backgrounds that are induced are no longer going to essentially trigger. And this is your astrophysical neutrino fluxes. So once you have 2 or 4 kilometers of rock, you're good. So that's like somewhere when you get to this color here, everything darker than that, you have a pretty good shielding. Okay, so this is what we can do. So we have 5,000 detectors that are, each of one are 2 square meters plus intellectual detectors. If we put them in a mountain, this is a function of the neutrino energy, the telescope size, the aperture, so it grows with energy. So here is Ice Cube, and here is TAMBO, and this is the Pierre Auger observatory. So over almost 3 orders of magnitude, we are the best detector in that energy range. And what I'm going to show you here is an animation of how one-time neutrino will be seen in our detector. So here is longitude and latitude, and this is a small part of the array. Color is elevation, and color is going to mean, the other color is going to mean time. And so this is how the showers will develop. You will have a shower that comes in, you will get it like this, and this is actually a particularly high energy event, and then you will use this to reconstruct your direction. Typically, these air shower arrays have an angular resolution that's better than about half a degree. To achieve half a degree resolution with 150 meter separation, you need about 10 sub-10 nanosecond time resolution. Okay, so this is the sensitivity that we get. So this is the neutrino energy, and this is 2 different options for 5,000 modules and 1,000 modules. And so you see that for 5,000 modules, we are maybe a little better at cube. This includes all the flavors. And then this is a nicer way of thinking about it. So if I put in the Ice Cube fluxes and some extrapolations and have 10 years of data, this is more or less sort of the error bars you will see. So you will be able to know if this continues or this breaks after 10 years of data taken. So what's going on with TAMBO is we have a funded prototype for 100 stations developed in Peru. So this is one of our collaborators are building this small test array on their campus. And this is how the detectors look. So they're like plastic scintillator bars with where the light is collected by this fiber and then with a CPM. And so they're about 2 square meters long. We're looking for sites to put the detector. This is the Colca Valley in Peru, which is one of the high altitude, the deepest valleys in the planet. We have a geological study, so working with the Geological Institute of Peru to find good sites. So these are some of the candidate sites that we can put our test array. So typically these sites fits hundreds of these detectors. So there are some constraints for these sites, like geometry for deployment, and we need roads and these sort of things. This is how this looks like, by the way. This is actually one of our candidate sites, this over here. You can see these things here. These are actual sort of dirt roads that you can use for deployment. So this is taken from the opposite Viras. There's actually a little town down there. So an important thing to notice is that you see these things here. These are called andenes in Spanish, but there is farming areas that were done there since like essentially the Inca times, where they flattened this out for farming reasons. So these are not uninhabited regions. These are regions where people live, people work. So there is infrastructure for work. So of course, when you have people around, you have to be careful with deploying detectors. So we actually have a responsible siting program led by my co-PI, who is a philosopher of science. And so we had a workshop with anthropologists, people from the Peruvian state, and some people had done all experiments like Pierre Auger, Hawk, or whatnot, at Harvard some years ago to talk about community engagement and how to work with the community so that they work with your project and whatnot. And we're actually trying to build on the experience of Pierre Auger that has done really good jobs with community building. And so now we're working with artists to portray with them how can you mind the experiment. This was done by a local company from the art. And now we're trying to fuse sort of like physics terms with like some of the local images. So you see here, this is supposed to be an oscilloscope signal that sort of transforms with one of their local dynamos. And so this is what we're working with some of these companies. So Neutrino telescope, exciting times, I think. So everything in green is funded. Everything in black will hopefully funded in the future. This is time. So right now we have these experiments that are operating, I just told you. In the future, we hope to have these ones over here, but it's very exciting because things are really happening in these fields. And with that, this is my take-home message, essentially that, as I told you, we are trying to find evidence for these quasi-dark neutrinos, which could give us 100 neutrino masses. I think we're making good progress in understanding the source of these neutrinos. And then all of these, there are very high uncertainties in the ultra high neutrino spectrum, but we have many experiments coming along to try to answer those questions. So with that, I thank you, some pieces of my students, some postdocs, and thank you for your attention. Oh, yes.
I might have missed this, but on like the plot you showed on slide 13 that you showed also like a few other times.
13.
Yeah, but you showed it like it was shown like multiple times, so it could also be on other slides.
This one?
Yeah, I didn't quite understand like why one of the events had such a big error bar.
Okay, this is sort of converted to flux. And so this is proportional to how many events we measure. And there's a part of the spectrum that there seems to be like a little dip. And so I think this is partially a Binning artifact, and the fact that the flux may have a little dip over here. So these are statistical error bars, essentially.
Okay.
So there's some uncertainty in the event energy position. Okay, so there may be like here for sure there is flux, how much that dips into the next one. Okay, so this error bar, maybe this is a 1 sigma error bar, probably the 90% level is actually reaches 0. So this is telling you that if you were to plot this at the 90% or something like that, you would argue that there is this data points, then there is a gap, and then this one here. And that's part of the question about if there is some more structure at the high energies that suggests for different components or it's one component. Like here in this plot, the Kempton net event is over here, but you can already see that there is some kind of substructure here. That's what, does that answer your question?
Yes. In neutrino physics, do you guys do like rebinning studies, like with simulations to like, would that like make it smaller? Or?
Yeah, so the binning for this analysis was probably fixed before it was unblinded. So they just fixed that binning to this binning. So they could have gotten a little unlucky or lucky in where these events end up. So now it does happen that we do multiple analysis and there's a lot of data overlap. So another analysis could be a little different binning. So in some of the ISQ plots, you will see this dip more or less prominent depending on the analysis binning that was chosen. But I think there is some circumstantial evidence at the maybe 2 sigma level that there is some kind of deep-like structure somewhere over the descendant range that is seen throughout various binning choices. That's a good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Is
Ice Cube sensitive at all to like core collapse supernovae as like a glow rather than like a cascade or shower?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't talk about that. But essentially, when there's a core collapse supernova, you have lots of low energy neutrinos. Those will essentially increase the noise rate of Ice Cube in a sort of correlated fashion. And by looking at the correlated noise between the PMTs, you can look at them. Yeah.
I had a question about for the TAMBO detectors. So will they also be water Cherenkov? So you'll have an array of water tanks instrumented?
Yeah. We had a very long debate about this, and I don't have much slides to show you on that, but the cosmic ray physicists told us that we should put water Cherenkov because water Cherenkov detects the charged particles and the photons. But then we were like, well, but if you have water Cherenkov, there are multiple problems. First of all, you have to put water up that mountain, which implies that you have to tell communities you're taking water from the rivers, which is complicated. Second of all, it's logistically more difficult because you have to build a tank on site. And then the advantage of the scintillator panel is that you can build it here or anywhere and you can just ship it and just put it there. So logistically, it was kind of nightmarish. Now, that being said, so we went for the scintillator design, but then we were like, okay, we should probably study, and we started thinking about having some bladders you will just install on the side and sort of fill them in with water. So some kind of like new adapted water scintillator designs. But then we have done a study that we hope to publish later this year that compares the detector's efficiency with plastic scintillator only and water detector only. So it turns out that if you use scintillator panels, even though they can only see the charged particles, which are lesser in these showers, the fact that the tau showers typically end up being very collimated showers. So they tend to hit many detectors, in fact. So if you change your detectors from plastic scintillators to water tanks, you increase your efficiency by 10 to 20% at most. However, your backgrounds, because now it's able to pick up all of these gamma rays from cosmic ray showers, increase by a factor of about 20. So it turns out that you're actually better by doing plastic scintillators because you have a lower background, but not seeing all of these gamma rays from cosmic ray showers. Even though your efficiency is about 10% less, it's actually just fine. It's better. I mean, that adds to the logistic things I was just talking to you earlier. But yeah, that's a very good question, and it took us a while to figure that out.
And then just quickly, like how big would each module be? So
yeah, so we are still optimizing that. I think I have a picture here. So this is one that we have copied from our colleagues in IceCube, but this is about, say, this big by, kind of half of this table. And so the objective is that the weight of each of the panels should be less than 50 kilos, so then it can be carried by 2 people. So there's some weight constraints, but we are still optimizing that.
Can we go back to slide 21? I had another question on that plot.
21.
Yeah. Just a small thing. Why on the lower limit of the TXS shaded region is there a discontinuity at like 10 to the 5 GeV? What does that? Is there just like something? Yeah, like is that like limited by statistics or systematics, or is there something going on there? Like,
so what you're seeing here is what we do. How we usually do these fits. We have 3 parameters or a pivot point. We'll fix the energy, a reference point, and then what we do is we feed a power law spectrum to it. So there's like normalization and a slope. And so this sort of fit produces naturally sort of kind of like a butterfly sort of fit, because the pivot point is fits. So it's a bit artificial, essentially. But this is telling you more or less that this is a relatively hard spectrum with like could be a little softer, a little harder. So another way of saying is that this is sort of an artifact of how the fitting is done.
okay, but it doesn't have to do with that point that Mira like.
No. It has nothing to do
Those
with
are completely separate.
No. What? Yeah.
One quick one. So is there any physical motivation for why like the high energy neutrino spectrum would like rapidly fall off, like a GZK cutoff kind of mechanism, or is it believed that it should like tail back up?
So the GCK spectrum, that's another really fun thing actually. Yes, so the GCK neutrinos, so when cosmic rays end up, they produce Argüelles GCK neutrinos. There is some circumstantial evidence of the GCK cutoff that what we're seeing is actually GCK cutoff, but those neutrinos, so-called cosmogenic neutrinos, appear in this energy range. I expect to appear in this energy range over here. So they are not supposed to be. What you're seeing here is not the cosmic rays hitting CMB photons. These are actually neutrinos producing astrophysical sources. What you're talking about, which is the cosmic rays sort of interacting with the CMB making neutrinos, that will appear in this range here. So this event could be one of those. Now, why will this die off? Well, these sources are natural accelerators, and they have confinement regions. So like our own galaxy can only accelerate cosmic rays up to so much high energy because the magnetic field of the galaxy only contains protons to so much high energy. So the neutrino spectrum from our galaxy eventually dies off because the cosmic rays have a maximum energy you can get to because of the galaxy size. So these sources over here probably have also some kind of maximum range of acceleration. So you could be seeing the natural termination of these objects here. Or it could be just that you run out of stats because this is falling like a power law. Like here is small counts, right? So this is a matter of, we'll see. But yeah, it could be that the spectrum just finishes. Like it could be the spectrum finishes and then there is a gap and then something else comes here.